We're now on Daf Kuf Tes Amid Beis. Omer of Nachman. Mina and Minole. I'm going to quote a pasuk and a brisa to prove this. That even if he was mazed in shchita in a pagan service, nevertheless he's not disqualified. He could do tshuva. To Sanya, we learned to the brisa Kohen sha'avad avodas kochavim v'shav. Right, he was guilty of an avodas kochavim. And we're going to have to see whether he was mazed a shogeg vishav and then he did tshuva. Karbano reich nichach, he's kosher for henceforth after he does tshuva. B'mai, what's the case? Ilem shogeg, my vishav. What does it mean? He did tshuva. He was never delivered to the first. If he would have known, he would have desisted. He never would have done it. Shavei omedu. Ela pshita must be b'mazed. Oh, okay, it's b'mazed, but what is the brisa talking about? What was he mazed? Was he mazed in shchita or in zrika? Iba zrika kishav mehavi. Right? We said that if he does an avodas sheirus, which means zrika, and he was deliberate about it, he's henceforth for all eternity disqualified to serve in the mikdash. So how could it say here karbon reich nichoach ha'avid le'sheirus elolav b'shchita? The brisa is telling us that if the Kohen did a shchita deliberately, and then he does tshuva, he's kosher. Rav Sheshes Omer l'chol yolam b'shogeg. That the Bryce is talking about even in a case where he slaughtered without intention, but he did it in a temple for the idols. Im shav me'ikaro dechi avad b'shogeg avad karban reich nichaf. Im lav ein karban reich nichaf. So the word here, im shav mikaro, is referring to this beginning of the performance, which is shchita, and he did it b'shogeg, then he's kosher v'karmani lav. Otherwise, if he did it b'mezid, he's pasul. Okay, now we have another machlokes between Rav Sheshes and Rav Nachman. Ishtachava l'avodas kochavim. He worshipped in avodas kochavim, not as a Kohen in the avodah, but he bowed down, prostrated himself before an idol. Rav Nachman Omer karban reich nichach, he's kosher when he does tshuva, and Rav Sheshes Omer ein karban reich nichach, meaning if the avodah of a Kohen in the pagan temple is enough to apostle him, then if the Kohen himself worships the idol, certainly he should be apostle. And finally, another machlokas here between Rav Nachman and Rav Sheshes. Hodol yavodas kochav. He accepted an idol as his god. Now, this is my god. And then he did tshuva. Is Rav Nachman omer karbono reich nichach is kosher? Sheshes omer ein karbono reich nichach. Utzricha. Why do we need to repeat time after time this machlokes from Nachman and Rav Sheshes? Basically, it's a repeat performance. They're arguing in the same way over and over. No. If you're talking about the case of a zrika b'shogeg, is then by Hikam Rav Sheshes, that's where Rav Sheshes says that since he was involved in a full-fledged avodah of Sherus, then even though he did it b'shogeg, nevertheless he's possible mishum di avad le'sherus aval shchita. But you might think that Rav Sheshes would concede that if he didn't do an avodah sherus, but rather he did shchita and he did it unintentionally, is then I might think that Rav Sheshes would concede that he's kosher, Rav Nachman, and therefore I need to tell you that even in the case of shchita, meaning where there was no zrika, nevertheless, if he did it b'mezid, Rav Sheshes holds he's forevermore possible. B'yashmin in shchita. And if you would say the machlokes between Rav Sheshes and Rav Nachman in the case of shchita. And now we're talking about mazid, because again, even Rav Sheshes concedes that if b'shchita he was a shogeg, he's not possible. Mishum de ovid le avoda. I might think that Rav Sheshes, Emelo, where Rav Sheshes would not disqualify him, he would accept the position of Rav Nachman because he didn't do an avoda. V'yashmin ishtachava. And now we're saying that Rav Sheshes passes him even in the case where he didn't do an avodah, but he did shtachava, mishum de'avile ma'isa, but at least he did an action of worship. Aval hoda, but if he just says zekeli, this is my God, is then the dibur bi'alma, maybe it's only speech. Emelo, maybe Rav Sheshes would agree that he cannot be disqualified. The Mishnah says, "Ein tzarich lo medover acher." Mida komer ein tzarich lo medover acher. Michlal deveis chonya lava avodas kol chavmi. As we said when we learned the Mishnah, for the fact that Mishnah separates between the Kohen who did the service in Beis Chanya as opposed to Davar Acher, which means for Avodah Zarah, they're two separate things, and therefore the Avodah Beis Chanya is not called Avodas Kol Chavim. And Tanya, and this Mishnah would now support Kiman Diyomer Beis Chanya Lav Avodas Kol Chavim. And now we're going to quote a major machlokas. What was the status of Beis Chanya? What are they doing there? What was its purpose? Tisanya. Osa Shana Shemeis Shimon HaTzadik. Shimon HaTzadik was the Kohen Gadol in that year that he died. Amar Lehem Shana Zuhu Mes. He already predicted his own death within the year. Amar Lo. How do you know Rav Shimon HaTzadik, the great tzaddik? How do you know you're going to die within the year? Amar Lehem. Kol Yom HaKippurim, every Yom Kippur, when I go into the Beis HaMikdash, Nizdami Li Zaken Echad Levush Levanim, I see a kind of, a spiritual figure, maybe an angel, and Nis'atef Levanim, and he's dressed in white and wrapped in white. And Nichnas Imi, he goes into the Kodesh Kadosh with me, V'yotzim, and he goes out, and he escorts me out to tell me that, everything's fine. But Shana this year on Yom Kippur, the old man with the beard was in black, and he completely wrapped himself out in not just in black clothes, but also black headgear. Nechnasimi, he went with me into the Kodesh Kadosh v'lo yotzim, he didn't come back. The Kohanim, after his death, Rav Shimon HaTzadik, they were so moved by it, and I don't know if you want to use the word depressed by it, that they decide that from now on, when they duchen, they will, and you say Yivrecha Hashem v'Yishmecha, etc., they will not say the Yud Kei Vav Kei. They will not say the holy, ineffable name of God. Okay, now the Bryce is going to tell us about Chonyo. B'shas p'tiroso omer lehem Chonyo b'ni yishamish tachtav. He made a statement, Rav Shimon HaTzadik, publicly. I want my son Chonyo to replace me. Niskani bo Shimon Shimi ach. But Chonyo had another brother whose name was Shimi, and he got jealous. So Gadol Mimenu, he was older by 2.5 years. Omer lo. So now Shimi is going to contrive a whole situation in which Chanyo is going to get killed. He's going to be murdered. Amalo, Shimi tries to trick Chanyo, and he says to him, I'm older than you. I have more experience. I'm going to teach you what your avodah has to be like in the Mikdash. Hilbisho, he puts on female clothes. Bi'unki v'chagaro b'tziltzul, like a kind of a leather blouse, and he put on a belt with an attractive sash. I don't know, maybe it was red, but anyway, they were feminine clothing. And of course, Chonyo was going to wonder about this. And then, so Rashi fills in the missing blanks over here that Shimi told his brother Chonyo that he's got to appease his wife and do something really glorious. We always think, how do you buy a gift for your wife on her birthday or on the anniversary? wear her clothes in the Mikdash. That's going to be a covered for her. Very bizarre. Anyway, Ru'u ma noder zev lavu vaso. And Shivo now says, take a look at this Chanyo. This is the guy that you want to take over as Kohen Gadol. Look what he's wearing, female clothes, in order to express his beloved wife. Also, ayom shesh tamish bekuna gedola. Elbosh, apparently, this is what the story that Shimi is telling the other people, that he Chanyo swore to his wife that on the day that I serve as Kohen Gadol, the very first time, I'm going to wear your blouse and your belt with your sash, and I'm going to demonstrate my deep love for you. When they saw that this is true, they wanted to kill Chanyo. Again, I don't know why exactly Chanyo deserves to die for that. That I don't know. But maybe since they wanted to make sure that he would no longer serve as a Kohen Gadol and that they could appoint Shimi in his place, they would kill him. Ratzvipnim, he ran away from them. Ratzvachim, they followed him. Holach Lasandria Shabbatam, he got all the way to Alexandria. I don't know how he got there, but anyway, Ubanasham Mizbeach. And there he builds a Mizbeach. I guess he still felt that, he's the real true Kohen Gadol. And Helel of L'Shum Avodas Kol Chav. So again, according to this Tana, Chanyo just went off the derech entirely, and he's now worshiping in a temple that he built in Alexandria, Mitzrayim, for pagan culture. Now, this is a little bit of a digression. It's a moral lesson that the Brisa adds over here, that when the Chacham heard about this thing, Ma zeshlo yorad lo koch. Let's make a kal v'chomer. Again, the Chachamim, I think, at this point realized that this whole thing was set up. It was a setup from Shimi. And look at that Shimi. He was suffering from envy because his younger brother was appointed to replace him by Shimon HaTzadik. Hayored lo al kachas hekama. And Shimi wasn't even appointed as a Kohen Gadol. But how much more so Hayored lo al kachas kama? A person will be jealous and suspicious, like Trotsky. He'll think everyone's out to get him to steal after he becomes a Kohen Gadol. Because, and this Reb Meir Shita, once you serve in a certain capacity, you get so used to it, you love it so much. It's the worst thing in the world if they bring you down. So Reb Yehuda says, wait a minute, you got the whole story wrong. Elo lo kibel olav chonyo. When Shimon HaTzadik, the father, died, and he wanted to appoint and offer the office to Chanyo, Chanyo refused. Shaya Shimi Achiv, Golem Enishtage, he didn't want to insult Shimi Achiv. V'afal pikein is kane bo Chanyo v'Shimi Achiv. It wasn't Shimi who was jealous, but rather Chanyo became jealous. Because initially, Chanyo was out for the good, but when he saw that he gave up on being Kohen Gadol, it really, really burnt him up inside. So actually now the tables are turned, and it's actually Chanyo who's going to now set it up that Shimi, who's serving as the Kohen Gadol right now, should be killed. Amalo, Chanyo tries to convince Shimi, Bov Alem Cheseder Avodah Hilbish Bunki Abdon Yisrael, Hamido Eitzam Mizbech, Amalem Eliyachav HaKohanim, Re'um Anoder Zeh, V'Kiyem Lavu Vaso. This Shimi took a pledge to his wife that he's going to wear her clothing. Osa Yom Shishtamish B'Kunigal, on the first day that he'll serve. Elbow Shunki Bikshu Echav HaKohanim Lahargo. So again, now they're after Shimi in this version of the story of Rabbi Yehuda. And now the Kohanim are now out to kill Shimi, and Shimi says to them, "You know what? Let me tell you the story as it is. Sachlem es kol ha'ma'or." They convinced the other Kohanim that he, meaning I, Shimi, I'm guiltless, and on the contrary, Chanya was the one who wanted to steal the Kuna Gedola. So Bikshu Laroges Chanya. At this point, they believed Shimi. They were, and Shimi was telling the truth, and they wanted to kill Chanya. Ratz name Ratz Achrem, Ratz Acharav, Ratz Beis Hamelech, Ratzu Achrav Kol Haro So Omer Zehu Zehu. In other words, everybody saw Chanyo as he's a fugitive, running away, and they said, there he is. But somehow he got to the palace of the king, but the king saw that the people are all out, the Jewish people are all out to get him. He says, I can't protect you. So what does he do? Wow. Says Rabbi Yehuda, how do I know that Chanyo is kind of doing tshuva, and therefore he's setting up a kind of temple outside of the Beis Hamikdash, but all for L'Shem Shamayim, and based on, I see this in a pasuk in Yeshaya. What does it say in Yeshaya? Shenema v'hoy bayom hahu yeh mizbech Hashem b'toch Eretz Mitzrayim matzeva eitzel gvul Hashem. So Yeshayahu is prophesying that there will be a mizbach Hashem in Mitzrayim, and that's Beis Chanya. Shamu Chacham b'Dover Amru. What's the Musa Shmuz from this whole thing? Ma zeh shebarach mimenu kach. Look at Chanyo and how he behaves, and he tries to trick up his brother Shimi. Even though initially he was the big saint and he wanted to give Shimi, because he was 2.5 years old, all the limelight. It's a vakish leirid la alachas kam v'kama. Somebody who strives to lay claim will certainly behave in such a despicable way. Tanya, we learned to the Brisa, Amol lo Reb Shimon Prachya. Right, Reb Shimon Prachya is like the Gadol Ador, and he says, B'tchila kol ha'omer alei la. Anyone who would tell me I should be the Gadol Ador and take over the Nesius, then ani kofso v'nosel lefnei ari. Right, in his humility, Rav Yeshua did not want to take upon himself to be the Nasi. But Ata, he says, I have to admit now that I've been serving as the Nasi, kol ha'omeli leiridman, if anybody takes over the position and gets rid of me, ani matil olav kumkum shalcham, and I'll do him under. I'll dump a kettle of hot water over his head. Sharei Shaul, I'll prove it to you from Shaul. Barach mimenu. Initially, Shaul did not want to be the king. He didn't want to be in the limelight. He was very humble. But after he became the king, and Bikesh Lagos David, and David was now a competitor to take over the Malchus, then Shaul tried to kill David. Amalei Mark Shisha Berei Derav Chizdol Abaye Rabbi Meir Haikra Rabbi Yehuda my Ovidle. I mean, after all, Rabbi Yehuda has a very convincing pasuk that says in Yeshaya that there will be a Beis Hashem in Mitzrayim. And where answers look at Tanya, Li'achar mapaloso shel Sancherev. After the collapse of Sancherev, Yotza Chizkiah, he was the Jewish king, who Matzah b'nei Malachim, he found all these princes of the Goyim, of the various Malchios, and Hayoshim b'Krona shel Zav, there were carriages made of gold. He diran shel lavod avodas kol. Somehow he had such an impact on these princes that he made them take a vow that they would never worship idols. Shenemar, how do I see this? Bayoma hu yiyu chamesh orim b'eretz Mitzrayim medabro sfas Canaan. On that day, there will be 5 cities in Mitzrayim that speak the Hebrew language of Canaan. V'nishbos Lashem tzvos, and they'll swear by the name of Hashem. In other words, this is the impact that Chizkiyahu had on all these princes. Holchulach Sandreya Shal Mitzrayim Ubanu Mizbech V'Helulav L'Shem Shamayim. All of these princes, I forgot, does it tell you the number of them? There were thousands of them, I think. One second. Okay, I don't see it right now. Oh yeah, here it is. A Gemara in Sanhedrin says there were 45,000 princes, and they were accompanied by princesses and courtiers and so forth and so on, and they all went up to Alexandria of Mitzrayim, and Banu Mizbeach Elisham L'Shem Shamayim Shenemar Bayom Ahu. This is the pasuk in Yeshaya. Yeh Mizbeach Hashem B'toch Eretz Yisrael. So it's not referring to Beis Chanyo, says Rabbi Meir, but rather to a different historical episode at the time of Chizkiyahu HaMelech. Now, the end of the pasuk says, Ir haheres ye'omer li'echos. Very ambiguous. My Ir haheres, and what does it mean? Kidemetargim Rav Yosef, we'll have to look at the Targum of Rav Yosef. He says, Karta, which is a city, the Beis Shemesh, which is called the Beis Shemesh region of the sun, the intense sun, right? I can look out the window and tell you about it. The Asid Lemechrav, eventually that city will be destroyed, but is Amar Dehi Chadaminhom. It's destined to be destroyed, and it's one of 5 cities. So Haheres means related to the roof to destroy, and Haheres means the sun, be Lashon Cheres, because Hey and Ches are interchangeable. And Umimai De'ir HaHeres Lishna de Shimshehi. How do you know that the word Heres refers to the sun? Dichsiv ha'omer lecheres v'lo yizbach. Right? He gives the command to the sun, and question mark, does it not shine? For sure it'll shine. Now, this brisa that we just finished teaches us that Melech Chizkiyahu had a tremendous influence on 45,000 princes of foreign lands to reject idolatry and to serve Hashem. Now, what was the positive spiritual influence that the Jewish people had on the Gentile populations when they were exiled into these various countries? But the Gemara first takes a little bit of a digression. It says, Heviu banai mirachok v'nosai miktzei eretz. Bring my sons from afar and my daughters from the ends of the earth. Havi'i banai mirachok. Bring my sons from afar. Amar Rav Huna Elu Goliel shel Bavel. Shedaitam yusheves aleihim. Wow. The Gemara is giving a once up, fingers up for Bavel amongst the Golios, because their temperaments are calm and composed. And here he differentiates, this is not so politically correct, between men and women. Benosai Mikseya Aretz. Other Golios of other countries, they're like the women folk. And women folk have temperaments that are not calm and composed. They get very emotional, very passionate. They change, they fluctuate. Ein daitim yusheves aleim kibonos. Mitzar, if you go from the land of Tsar all the way ad Kartigni to Kartigni, and Tsar is Tyre, which is the great coastal city of Phoenicia, modern southern day Lebanon. Kartigni should be Carthage, and it's near modern day Tunisia. Anyway, so this whole area, Kirin Es Yisrael V'Savim Shalayim, the Gentiles in this whole section of land are familiar with the Jews, they recognize them, and they're familiar with God in heaven. Mitzar Klape Marav, however, but from Tsar not to the east, but rather to the west, Kartini Klape Mizrach, and from Kartini to the east, Ein Makirin Es Yisrael V'Savim. Esvei Rabbi Shimon Bar Chio LeRav Mimizrach Shevav Yamo Gadol Shmi Bagoyim. Right, Malachi at the end of Tanakh says that from the rising of the sun to the setting of the sun, my name is great among the nations. B'chol makom muktar mugash l'shmiu mincha tahora. In every place you'll find that they bring an offering, they burn it, and they present it for my sake with a capital M and a pure mincha. So we see the Gentiles recognize Hashem throughout the world. Amalei Shimi at. Rav says, are you the great Shimi? Is that you? You're asking me such a question? I never meant to say the Gentiles who are beyond the Jewish settlement. I didn't talk about that. The Korele Aloha Aloha, right? I wasn't say that that the Gentiles who are beyond the Jewish settlement do not recognize Hashem at all. That's not what I said. But rather, you know what? They Korele Allah di Allah. They admit that there are other gods, but they recognize one God over the other gods. He's greater than the other gods, but they're still idol worshippers beyond the Jewish settlement. Only in those sections that we spoke about before, that's where they accepted only one God and recognized the Jewish people. Now the pasuk says, "B'chol makom muktar mugash l'shmi, b'chol makom sal kedaitach." Are you telling me that you're going to find karbanos burned l'shem karban in every single place for the sake of Hashem? That can't be. It's a reference not to the Goyim, but rather Talmidei Chacham engaged in Torah everywhere. And Hashem says this, it's as if you brought sacrifices for my sake. He who studies Torah with purity. And what does that mean to study Torah with purity? This is a major issue in halacha. No say isha v'akach lo meitov. First he gets wife, he gets married, he doesn't have thoughts from the Yetzer Hara, and then he learns Torah with a clear mind. Shira malos. I see where our time elapsed. Maybe we could put in another 5 minutes. It says, Hine baruchu es Hashem kol avdi Hashem omdu beis Hashem balelos. My balelos, right? The avodas hakarbon is during the day, not at night. Omer Rabbi Yochanan, elu talmidei chacham. It's an allusion to the scholars. Ha'oskim b'Torah b'layla, malalei amalkasim kilu asukim b'avoda. It gets uplifted to the status of as if they were doing the avoda in the Beis Hamikdash. That's the greatness of the Talmid Chacham who continues into the night to study Torah. My father told me about his shtetl where he was born in Plisa, that you could walk around the shtetl and see at night little candles burning. That was people who were studying Torah. Liolam zos al Yisrael. What does that pasuk mean? Omar Rav Gidol Omar Rab ze mizbeach bonoi. This refers to the mizbeach that's built in Shamayim. Michal Sar Gadol Omi de Makriv Halov Carbon, right? There's Yerushalayim Shel Mala Keneged Yerushalayim Shel Mata Beis Mikdash Shel Mala Keneged, and it says here that they had Lechem Aponim and they had Olos morning and evening. This was the avoda of Michal Sar Hagadol. Rabbi Yochanan Amar Elu Talmidei Chachamim. Again, I'm going to use this pasuk not to refer to the Beis Hamikdash Lamala, but rather to Talmidei Chachamim down here on earth. Ha'oskim be'hilchas avoda, they are engaged in Kodshim, and that's why we're going to end the Masechta with the significance of learning Kodshim. Malalei mekotzav kilu nivna Beis Hamikdash v'mimei. It's as if the Beis Hamikdash was built in that time. Omer shlok shemai dichsiv zos Torah zos haTorah la'ol la'mincha lachatos uli asham. A pasuk of Vayikra Perek Zion, and it says Chuka. And kol osik v'torah kilu hikriv ola mincha chatos v'asham. Amar Rava, hi li ola la mincha. Right, this phrase of the ola of the mincha, ola mincha mibayla. It should have said ola and mincha. What's of the ola of the mincha? Eloma Rava says that the lamed of la ola called osik b'torah enu tzarech. He doesn't need lo ola, lo chatos, lo mincha. None of them v'lo Asham. He doesn't need it. In other words, he's got enough zchuyot that he doesn't need these karbonos. Rav Yitzchak, my dechsiv, zos Torah sachatas, zos Torah sa'osham. The word Torah is called osik b'Torah chatas kilu hekriv karb. Karmachatas called osik b'Torah osham ki ilu hekriv osham. And this leads us to the Mishnah at the end of the parak and the end of the Masechta, which B'li Neder will make a seam tomorrow. So bring a Gemara Chulin, and I hope we can start Masechta Chulin, and that would be tomorrow at 9:30. Is that correct?
Right.